BTWRLM 182 this week. And we're still playing them crickets. In a way I didn't think I'd ever stop, and I will ever have to be able to stop. But in a way I'm disappointed that I'm not. You come every week, we got things to do, no excuses to make, and every week I see more and more convoluted discussion, and it's like, from my perspective, we're just going down, we are seriously sinking into that stinking abyss I've been talking about for years. After last week, on something very, very important, and as I look at these things, object lessons for our participation, getting us beyond just the whiners and complainers that we all seem to be at some level. I'm amazed at how many excuses we'll make not to get involved. After I explained the dire consequences of another style of indefinite detention through the CDC, planning by ruler, ruling, administrative fiat, bureaucracy, that there's mechanisms in place to check and balance your consent, and I offered that there would be something you could do in order to start the process of getting involved where it wasn't going to threaten anybody. Now, that just came out of me that day. It came out of me, just didn't know what else to really suggest, except I figure I got to give somebody a place to start if you don't have a concept. I also have in me the idea that if I give you something to start with, that's going to take away all the excuses. And I didn't realize that, as I say that now, I'm now saying it after a week of thinking about it. After I offered the action that you could take, non-threatening, get you involved, simple to do, I even gave you the words. 2 days later, I woke sleeping, a half sleep actually. It occurred to me I condemned my own broadcast at some level. And why is that? Now, it's not like I needed a whole lot of emails saying this is what I did or this is what, or not. But I remembered I said, if you're not going to do what I've asked you to do, to bring yourself into some kind of contention with this nonsense that we're facing, I want to know the better answer. Send me an email, markonthebeast@yahoo.com. Well, it occurred to me a couple days later, I wasn't receiving any emails, because I had already given you the words, and there should have been a thought in your brain real quick about how you weren't going to do it. In fact, I almost expected to see a bunch of emails sent to me before I even got post-production done saying how wrong I was, how there was a better answer and what answer was, and I was remiss to not say that one. And I got crickets, folks. But I got crickets the whole week now. But it occurred to me around Wednesday, middle of the morning, woke up, and I said, I've condemned my whole broadcast. And so for the next few days, I've been a little, not sure I don't even know what my attitude is on all this. I keep talking and tell everybody what's going on. Now, on the other hand, I didn't ask you if you did send something to send it to me. So we're going to have one more week here where I'm going to think about some things, but I think I've resolved it in a different way. See, I can't give up at some level. I don't care how, I'm going to have to be the last guy going down saying we had a better way to do it, and I'm going to be that only last example, apparently. Those of you that did send that letter that I asked you to send out, I even gave you the words, and I thought about it, and it holds up water in my mind for the whole week, that it was valid to do, to at least be a stick in the spokes of this bureaucratic administrators in Washington coming to take your life away and take you out of your life. That I would like to know now how many of you even repeated on paper, plagiarized my words, put them on paper, and pressed a stamp and sent it. I would like to know that. Because it occurred to me that if I can't even get you to do that, I gave you the package. I have to wonder what I'm doing here. I really have to wonder. And I've been on this couple of weeks. I've been really fighting this. It's hard to get justified. When you see so many problems and you see in one hand that it is a slow process, but you can deal with it as people. We've had another example, a friend of mine helping another interested party to figure out how do you do this stuff right to affect these criminals in these offices. And he was able to instruct that other one to do certain things, and I was going to keep it gender neutral, but she went into a commissioner's office and decimated 2 commissioners with the law and the facts. And did it stop? No. I put this in the chat, RLM chat. It didn't stop the crime. These creeds are career criminals, so you can't expect it to be over in a silver bullet matter. But she now has set them up for a malfeasance in office charge, and in their face told them they were violating the law, and they did. That I keep wondering why. If we had 10s and 15 people even, I don't have to have hundreds, even 4 or 5, even 3, were in the seats of decision of all the places that we live, wrote these simple letters and find the fact, do the research, find the facts in the law. That's all we talk about. You could set these criminals in office up for a takedown. The way they set us up, we do it different. We use the law. We don't use conjecture. We have another proof that what I'm telling you works, absolutely works, and it's as simple as doing what I told you last week. That I'm really not sure where I sit in this position as far as in emotion. I really kind of divorce myself from emotion, but there's something in there. I'm driven to be considerate of the problem. That I gave you all those that are listening, those that will be in the chats, complaining about all you can't do. I gave you something you could do. And I didn't ask you to send me what you sent just to see it or whatever. I asked you if you had a better idea, send that to me. Middle of the week, I'm thinking, man, I just condemn my whole listenership and my whole broadcast, because if you can't even do that much for yourself, what am I doing? And that's enough rant, because I want to get to the point of why it's not all over for me, but I want to hear now, what did you do? And if not, go to last week's pastcast, get my words I put down, put those down if you have no other words for your own, if you aren't going to read anything else about the CDC wanting to come and take you away as a healthy people, notwithstanding the feed you keep going after and absorbing and not stopping by the same mechanisms in other places. I want to hear what you have to say, but the only saving thing I came across, and I have to thank Duck out of UCY, it was a simple comment that he made on Saturday, I think it was, excuse me, with the day, or Friday, with Vince Easley's show, Feedback. And he said, listening to people like myself and Ron and whoever else he was talking about, and maybe Jules was, whoever it was, and people on other networks, it builds his resolve. And that's the finger hold that somehow I took, because that's really what I'm here for. I'm only here for those of you that really are wanting to come along. Now, building a resolve is not sufficient for me, and it's not sufficient for you. But if that's what we're doing, is to help build the resolve in people that forgot, then that's really, I have to hang my fingertips, my fingernails on the cliff here, on Duck's words, that I hope there's more of you building resolve, and that I hope you'll go back last week, not to listen to my broadcast, go find what I said about the CDC. I don't even care if you're outside the country United States. You're going to have to go through some United States territory at some point, possibly. You have a voice in this. Remember, it's a global world. Everybody matters. Now, if you make yourself matter, nobody matters until you do. Just claiming Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, Green Lives Matter doesn't matter. It's what you do to make it matter. So, go back to next week. Those of you that didn't, thought it was not important. I think it's important. I think it's a way. You know why it's important? It's not even a matter whether or not you affect it. I know it's important because as soon as you have to take and put some investment in even the words I said, and you make that important, there's the first step to removing your apathy and your excuses to do something somewhere. That's why that's important. So, I'm on, a cusp of some point. What am I doing here in face of the truth? That most people aren't are willing to help themselves. I'm asking you to go back to last week, find the words I said, put them in order. I know they come kind of weird, but sometimes they're not so bad. Write a letter and send a stamp. Make yourself effective where you may have not understand where you can be effective. Don't wait till the end. That day isn't guaranteed to you tomorrow anyway. So, not to threaten these broadcasters and pulling the plug, but I've been, all these years, I wonder. So I'm going to hang my fingernails now on the side of the stinking abyss, hoping that my example of hanging my fingernails is enough to build quicker the resolve that Duck was saying he gets from people like myself and Ron and Shally. Now I remember Shaliak, and others. Because that's all we really have if those of us that see the problem and actually can do things with it and against it and stop it and even slow it down until hoping the rest show up. That's about all we have left, folks. And I think that was pretty well clearly proven here this last week. And it didn't occur to me when I was presenting that. Although, I've said that before. Here, the simple thing to do. It just struck me right between the eyes. Maybe that third eye. The clarity of the problem. Handing everybody the tool they could use to get engaged amongst countering all excuse to get involved. Handing them the loaded weapon to start their process of protecting themselves. And I don't know if any one of you stepped up to do it. Now, I know a couple of you are probably out there that did, but I don't know that. And that's okay. I don't need to know that even 2 or 3 people. Everyone should have responded. And that should have been sent out to other people to do the same. If you do nothing else and you don't understand anything I say, for whatever reason, even though it's coming right out of the books, Vince Easley said the same thing. Now, this is starting to reminds me of sounds like hell. Well, that means that we're all confirming the same universal application. That what my words are coming from other people in places of looking at the reality of what we're dealing with and how to address it. All of us will start sounding the same. We all start to act very similar. It's not like acting out of the hive. What you're doing is you're acting in protection of yourself, self-defense against an oppressor, against an invader. Each one of you will decide that on your own what's important to you. But to not protect yourself, not defend yourself, somehow, let's put it this way, that's a mental illness. That's the height of cluelessness. Which should have been, I think, one of the original sins, I think, to not be clueless, literally. And to work hard to find out how you might be. So I'm going to reiterate last week's broadcast this week about how important it is to get involved. Stop the CDC bureaucrats from making a rule. I gave you all the language. It's just a few sentences, folks. That's the other thing that got to me. I do this over and over with people, and when they do it, they see a difference. And I don't know why I'm seeming to be the only one that sees this yet. But that may be the part I play while we walk ourselves hand by hand through the problem so that we understand that there was this better way. In other words, my friend who helped the other advocate now, the other party who was sick and tired of being abused by the commissioners in a county, stepped up, did the research, and confronted that. That process was a hand-by-hand, step-by-step process on fulfilling that objective, and it works. It just drove the point that I'm telling you home about what I said last week. Just jump in. The CDC to you has a major threat, but no jeopardy in responding. All you have to do is babysit that problem, and you get yourself a standing to go in and stop it. Otherwise, silence is consent. The oppressor takes advantage. And that thing I was offering last week trumps everything in the chat rooms about you not being able to do anything. I don't even know what my mind wants to say how much we do behind the scenes. It just shuts the government down, and I just can't do it. Partly it's just because we do the way we do things in Jefferson Mining District. We don't promote. We also don't promote for a reason. We don't give anticipation to the other side of how they're being defeated, how they can't move along, all the things they might come up with forethought if they knew what we were doing to try and make it look like they had a response, which they never ever do, but that's notwithstanding the point of the obfuscation that you're up against. And I'm not talking about my opinion here, folks. I'm talking about in the trenches, the warfare that we're in, as simple as it doesn't look like the warfare that we're in on paper. Which should, that's the other thing. If that's all it is, we're not actually having to take lead to our bodies. What is the real excuse? And that's where I got to the point a long time ago saying, we got the people that'll come talk about all this stuff. They complain, and then pretend they're in the liberty movement, alternative this, freedom, men on the land, whatever the heck title you want to call yourself to make yourself feel good, and won't lift a finger to protect yourself. And last week I handed you another finger to protect yourself, and I don't know if any of you picked up on it. Now you argue, obviously argument with me a bit, it's softening, but I see no real roll-up-the-sleeves attitude, and that's not going to make it for us. I just tell you that. You may not agree with me. You may, what the heck do I know? Oh, you don't know how it is. Well, I do know how it is. You are anticipating something in me you don't understand. And I'll tell you what, another thing on Ron's broadcast on UCY TV website 2 hours before my broadcast, to hear Duck going through what he's doing on a traffic issue just breaks my heart. But I can't do much more about it. I can only give what I can give. I hope people listen more clearly on what I'm saying and apply what I'm saying is a counter to what these criminals are doing. I hear Ron speak about being a man not attachable by the legal, and yet they attach it, and I've been trying to tell you all how to make that so. You don't let them get away with a complaint without a counter-complaint for sure. And you don't make the complaint within the jurisdiction that you're making. You say, no, you trespassed my jurisdiction. And then you charge them against their duty that they've taken to adhere to their statutes. And you move the crime against you that they're doing into their system of public record to let everybody else know. In other words, you don't take their claim laying down. You make a counterclaim. What did I suggest to you we did on a so-called traffic issue that was actually a mischaracterization of the right of use of the road, the usufruct of the highway? We turned it right around and charged them with felonies for mischaracterizing the use. We found out in quick order of the laws in their statutes, those statutory codes that everyone wants to poo-poo, the thing they're liable to, that the courts themselves are money launderers. We've heard all this, but has anybody settled down to prove it on a piece of paper and submit that as a counter offensive against their crime against you? I don't mean the system, I'm talking about the people. Identifying the judges each themselves. How many people do that? Same thing with these bureaucrats at CDC. Where do they have the right? They're going to claim police powers, the color of the authority of the state. That's a felony where it interferes with your rights, whatever rights you want to talk about. I'd caution imposing too much about your civil rights, though. You've heard about that. That's the right you're given to equally pay extortions of every kind. I don't know how many times I have to say all this stuff. It's repeated and repeated. And yes, I'm getting a little bit upset with myself here, sitting there being upset with the lack of response from last week. And it's always amazing to me. That's on one other thing, and then I'll move on. How people can anticipate that I'm going to ask them to do something, and then they don't show up without knowing what I'm going to say. Unless there's this telegraphy that's going on behind the scenes that everybody's communicating. Oh, you better not listen to that broadcast because he's going to ask you to do something. That last week again, when I gave you a tool, we had a way lower return on people listening to the podcast, as I could tell by the numbers I have. Why is that? What is that in us that can anticipate that point? Is it that much coincidence that every time I do that, the number of listeners seems to go down? Just one of those coincidences I'm never ever going to prove, but it happens every time. And so, where we are today, crickets, I played them again. Are we going to actively engage, or are we going to continue to whine about this? I really just don't know. I'm hanging on the slimmest, I'm glad my health is good enough. I take vitamins too, and I eat well. My nails are strong enough that I think I can hang on for a bit longer on the edge of the stinking abyss. Showing that you too may have to hang on the stinking abyss instead of being in it. Comments from Duck, how it helps him. Comments from responses and energy expended by Vince Easily in his broadcast, trying to come to terms, trying to tell you all in a different way. Hopefully, we'll see. I'm working right now to see how we can get his voice, clear. If people don't understand me, maybe they'll understand the way Vince can say it. I don't know. He's found consistency and correctness in what I say over time. And I can only tell you that's been my objective, and it all comes from objective basis. No opinions. I don't make up things like, different flavors of anarchy and all this nonsense that goes on. No, there's a reality about all that. This is not anarchy, have it your way. This is not Burger King anarchy. And I say that because now as I'm thinking about Vince in the broadcast, I think I heard, and I only got in on the very end, I think Grimner was talking about and Vince was talking about these things. And I like the term better, at least for my sensibilities and definitional base and experience and how it interacts with the world. Voluntariness, or voluntaryism, it's still an ism, but voluntaryism is much better than trying to glom on to this term called anarchy, which has only one meaning, and it's not anything I have heard anybody who talks about it actually say. It's recognized the world over completely different. And if you don't understand that, you walk yourself into that and other misinterpretations and mischaracterizations. And so I appreciated hearing from Grimner and Vince's discussion. We're really thinking about we should be free to do what we will, and certainly not, within the bounds. And there's a freedom now. Within the bounds of freedom, not of being free. Within the bounds of not hurting others. I'm totally agreeable with that. See, this is the thing. There's a subtlety maybe that what I say. And that's why we get along, I think, mostly. We all understand what we're actually talking about. But when we're communicating concepts and ideas, it's no different than the subtlety I said with the court and the DAPL. That was unfortunate they used the front door, or at the doorstep. It was unfortunate. Because there's a different word you need to really use in my mind when you're dealing with these things. That's the kind of difference. So if you don't understand that, you're going to go down the path of a misinterpretation pretty quickly. That's not my opinion. That's what I watch people do all the time. It's our refinement of our own language in the law that exposes the legal for being the criminal that it is. It's that simple. That's why it requires us to be a very high integrity about the language that we haven't been told. When I'm speaking, I may speak about legal, but I'm not speaking from legal. And so you have to keep the relativity part of this correct, always. And I take that for granted. I don't know how many people actually understand that. I mean, there's a way you can say you understand it, but I can tell in practice that, no, it's a deeper understanding. There's something about it. You can't even talk about some of this stuff to explain it. It's so deep, actually. It's the biting lines that can't be crossed, that you don't. It's the jurisdictions that you don't cross. And if you get your mind off of the language that keeps that jurisdictional purity, you will walk and trip right over and trespass into someone else's territory, and they'll pick you up if they're of the mind to do so. Now, there's a big trespass on us. There's a big movement, and we were talking about this in the chat of UCY. I think we got, I don't know that I was just trying to straighten some stuff up, but there's a misinterpretation, not sharing where the source is, between this thing environmental. There's a genuineness about us living in a clean environment, and then there's this word that they use as a pretext to co-opt underneath that need a totally different agenda to come in and destroy us. That, I think, got confused, and the chat's not a good place to straighten it up. that I'm going to talk about that in the extension of the NAPL this week, as I told you I would get to. And I don't understand I'm just disappointed at what I see coming out of NAPL and the people supporting all that as well. And no one's drawing the proper lines, and they keep bringing in the stalking horses and utilizing them instead of the real things that they have right to use. And then they misapply it, and it drives me nuts. And so nobody advances their cause properly, and it convolutes everything, and everyone gets the wrong impressions and gets the wrong ideas, and nobody really learns what needs to happen. So before I get on to where I'm going to go, remember I'm talking about the steward. Call yourself a steward. You want to be a steward. That's where I was going last week from DAPL. First, I want to touch some things I think are very important. That we've got to keep. I always keep tabs. I don't really speak too much on them, but I think we need to know they're happening, and we may know they're happening. More proof of how they're, this system called legal does you in. It's complete crime, and everyone will say that, but no one really knows how to address it. And it's as simple as making written record of that and start to show people. Start with yourself, and then start by your written record to show and call out these crimes as you feel comfortable to do within your knowledge base and your application base. Like the lady we had go into the county commissioners and call them out for the criminals they were, and set up now the record to show and to prosecute officers underneath what we can agree is a malfeasance in office on an objective basis, not our opinion. That didn't happen until she stepped up to do that. They weren't called out for their crime until she stepped up to do that. And I'm going to continue here a little bit more. Something else just popped in my mind. This week, I get irritated a little bit, and so that kind of sticks with you a little bit. I keep hearing people say, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Well, so what are you going to do about that? No, that's the problem. It's not what you speak from yourself saying you, the other guy, is going to do. The question is now, what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? This is not a defeatist condition unless you're defeated. What am I going to do about it is every time you hear the what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Like as a general, what are you, as all of us, going to do about it? No, the question is not a question. It's a statement of purpose. What am I going to do about it? Or quit whining. And I try to bring in the tools to say, here, this is what you can do about it, at least in part. Certainly I don't know them all. I don't know everything. Don't think I've ever said that I did. But there's certain methodologies that work across jurisdictional, well, I'll call them authorities because they exist in the world. In reality, they are applied. And agreeing to that and then addressing them on that term instead of the fabricated ones gets more mileage and more traction than anything else I've found. And so here behind the woodshed we get those principles. They may smart, but they make you intelligent if you're going to apply them. If you're not, I don't even know why you're listening. I don't know why you chat. I don't even know why you exist in places that look to see for a better day for yourself and those around you. I don't get it. So one of the continuing frauds in the system that we have going on is the system. And what it's going to do to you, and I'll just go through these things pretty quickly before I get to my steward and stakeholder and stalking horse paper. Not me saying this. I'm reading it right out of those people that have co-opted your lifestyle on how they do it to you. That's the big deal here. Within the structure set up to take you down. Why you got to fight? Why I was telling you about the Bundys and all that. They have to fight the jurisdictional competency. They can't do it from inside the jurisdiction. It's one little thing you all don't get in the chat. Oh, you can't go into the system and fight it. No, you can't. So that's why you stay out with the right, what they call pre-plea remedies and avoidance. And you trap these people within that structure and you call out the fraud that before you get in. If you're trapped anyway, you better do something proper. But the FBI and the DOJ, this is federal, and I'm sure it's no different anywhere else. They all come from the same thing. They all come down, and the caucusocracy rolls down from the top onto everybody else. The FBI, DOJ, and their forensic scientists state they'll continue using discredited junk science to put people behind bars. It's something that we've talked about here behind the Woodshed. It's something that we understand and know. Here's another proof. Only this now they're admitting to it, this government admits to it, and will continue to violate the law, which is more evidence that you cannot get justice in the system, and that's one of your defenses. You make a public record when you get collected up. You do it beforehand, so maybe you won't get collected up. When they figure out they're going to have a tiger by the tail, they more than likely and most often, as I've seen, leave you the heck alone. The government is saying that they rely on no science, essentially, to put people in bars, which says that there's a collusion between the investigators and the prosecution and the government, as we all know in word, but you need to have in your mind as evidence to counter these people. I can extend this point over into your appropriations of monies for the purposes of judicial review of crimes. Why can't you? When you get to do that, that's a misappropriation of public funds for an improper purpose. Why can't you shut down this system? Why can't you make it a malfeasance in office to vote for a system that does this? Or create the budget from the budget committee that supports the system that relies on evidence that's not actually evidence, but just deems it to be so, because it's legal. See, as I said before, I look at this now as these things as evidence. What they're doing is they're telling us this is what we do, and if you are crickets, they continue to do it. This link I'll have in the broadcaster. We'll have a report. It comes from the President's Council of Advisors in Science and Technology. And it's such a hot potato that they have everybody's fighting over this. That is evidence that the judiciary who's been relying on this has not done their duty, which we all know, but now you can prove that they aren't if you don't rely on what we found out in 2013 with their Bar Association default, where we said, you have created a false system that destroys the Republican form of representative government, i.e., the protection of rights and property, the peace and settlement of the people. You have constructed an adversarial system. We'll go back to Lincoln for that, but let's keep it focused on the bar because they perpetuated it. They picked it up again in the middle 50s. And your system now has been shown by the President's own council, so-called. Even the President of the Corporations Council. I don't care about that. See, it's irrelevant here. Within their structure is now a damning report, as it's reported here in this report from TechDirt, a damning report that they cannot produce evidence that isn't a question in a number of areas. That to me is evidence for y'all to put up in your bag of law or your bag of offense to show that whatever you're going to do in this system, it relies, they cannot show, and this is how I say, show how your system works better than this thing from the President's report. Remember, this even addresses now the war powers, if you understand where I'm at. This even undermines that point where they would have oppressive power under war powers. Those of you that listen to me for a long time, if you've really been putting this together, maybe Vince is coming on to this. He sees how comprehensive this discussion actually is across all spectrum of oppression. Why? Because it deals in there's a kind of a universal knowledge, a global, if you will, not getting global governance, but there's in people, in men and women, there's an abiding law of what's right to do. We speak from there to identify the adulteration. Thou shalt not commit adultery, we're told. Everyone wants to go sexual because that's a big enthusiasm for people. Don't adulterate is what I get out of it after my readings. I've said this before over and over. 1 drop of E. coli in water, if I knew that drop was in there, I would not drink a 55-gallon drum. I wouldn't drink the 200-gallon drum of water. 1 drop of E. coli, adulterating 200 gallons, 500 gallons. How much would you, how diluted do you want to make that before you'd want to drink it? Some poisonous substance and some toxic substance that'll kill you in the nanoparticle concentrations. Would you drink that adulterated water? I'm not saying that you have to. I'm saying you had a choice. Would you drink it? Most likely you would not. Any sane one would, I think, would have to say, no, I won't drink that. Why? Because it's adulterated. 1 drop. So thou shalt not commit adultery means that no one shall commit adultery, not adulterate. That includes the truth or the proofs or the evidence. And when it is, it's a fraud. It's whatever any crime you want to start to call it. You have evidence in this report, so-called President's Council, whether that's the legitimate United States, the sovereign, or the corporate, their internal high command says that there's flaws in what you're doing to people. That international law would preclude all law. All law would preclude. The oxymoron that war of law is even. So, to me, this was a big story again. When the people, I said, when you find the proof out of the words of the criminal themselves confessing and admitting to the crime, this is important. And until someone steps up with and I would see numbers, because we do need the numbers now. Numbers of people would find this important and act on it. I don't know how that's going to change, and you're all, at some point, you and your little ones in the future are going to be susceptible to this crime against us. And now that you know it, I've condemned you to know that that's the ring in your nose now until you pull it out. I don't mean just thinking that you do, I'm not going to deal with it. No, you have to deal with this. Because it'll deal with you if you don't. And you may be lucky. You may live under a lucky star and never see it. That doesn't sound like Duck's experience, though. So, moving on to the next fraud, and we call it fiat. The next fraud, adultery, the adulteration. A very important thing happened here in the last few days, and I don't touch it too much. I touch it a little bit just to keep track. I'm certainly not understanding of it, but I do know it supports what I am fighting with this. We put it underneath the term that sustainable development that we've all heard. It's this global war of terror on you. It has nothing to do with the Middle East, although that's part of it. Remember the migration of 2030. All this comes underneath. I've told you this is a financial construct protected by a military consequence. I say this over and over. This is why this becomes very important. We're watching the alteration and acceleration all at once in this new fulfillment to this point of what I've reported on before. Chinese yuan becomes IMF reserve currency, first new edition since '99. The Chinese yuan, and it gets deeper than this, folks. Remember, we went to the IMF. That's the International Monetary Fund. If you thought China was outside of all this, or Putin, or any of these people, the Chinese yuan has been added to IMF reserve basket, becoming the first currency to be added to the list since 1999. I told you this was coming. It's not because I'm predicting it. They said it in the word. They said it in everywhere was telling us this. It's here now. The official entry was made Saturday, bringing to a close, at least partially, Beijing's years-long struggle for international acceptance on the sort of level enjoyed by the U.S. dollar. On the sort of level enjoyed by the U.S. dollar. Remember how to read this. This is the U.S. dollar enjoys the level of a fraud and a constitutional destruction. So understand how to read what they're telling us here, and you'll start to see the picture a little bit better. What's on us. You can argue about what the name of it. You can argue about the conspiracy theories. You can argue about what it's going to be called and who done it. They're doing it, folks. And here's who's doing it. We don't have to, there's no surmise anymore, no conjecture. And you can choose to continue to be in this. And I'm going to tell you, because of this report, it tells us it's going to be very, very, if not impossible, to not be under this. Okay, so I just lost another 99.9% of the people. Then what are we going to do about it? Shrug your shoulders and go away. But there is something you get to do with it. If each one of us took the right course, each one of us would not consent. They will not be able to accomplish this thing. And this thing is an illusion. And so I have an article coming that'll talk about it. Everyone knows what this is, and yet we're going to not respond by not responding. Instead of responding in the appropriate way that we are told we need to respond in weight and measure and substance, at least in the United States, and it's elsewhere in the world. It's not unusual. The currency, yuan, now will join the big four, the euro, the yen, the British pound, and the US dollar. You see here the British pound was never in the EU, is it? It was always Brexit, as I see this, and to tell you that that's why it had to happen, what you saw happening. The decision means the Chinese yuan will now be used as one of the International Monetary Fund's leading currencies, the International Monetary Fund's leading currencies, in times of emergency economic bailouts. This sort of internationalization is in line with China's wish for increased legitimacy of its currency. So you're talking about money here, folks? No, you're talking about a control structure. The move is also evidence of China's growing role as a power to challenge the global economic dominance of the United States. The limitations China places on its own markets, however, have themselves been to blame for this delayed outcome. This is neither here nor there in the fulfillment of this. Quote, it's an irreversible path towards opening up, integrating into the global economy and playing the economic game by the rules, proclaimed IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde, who herself is underneath, I haven't even got to those stories, who herself is underneath criminal charges and was ordered to go suffer those trials. It's an irreversible path, folks. Remember what they're saying here. I'll stop reading there. That's not what I'm here for today, but you have to know this is it. This is honest. The World Bank issues SDR bonds in China. What did I tell you before? This is going to be the SDR, this fiction, another fiction on top of fiat, on top of illusion. I think they telegraphed how the method was in letting us know that there was this thing called derivatives. Frauds upon frauds, ensuring bonds upon frauds. And we think it's real. The governments start to buy into it. This is a public buy-in, irreversible buy-in to global financial dominance by a particular organization. The World Bank on Wednesday issued landmark bonds denominated in special drawing rights in China's interbank market. That was an interesting thing there. They also did a private SDR. They invented this too, just for China. They just invent these things. The 3-year bonds are worth $500 million. That's SDR, nearly $700 million US dollars. Remember now, they're really tying this to the value of the dollar. They're going to neutralize all of these values. The international commerce will work on an SDR or some equivalent. These were billed as Mulan bonds. The Chinese currency, the yuan and renminbi, will be used as settlement currency. There's a very special relationship between these bonds and the settlement currency on the direct bond and the settlement currency, on how all this plays out and what it does for those that are involved. It is the first issuance of SDR bonds since 1981. A much bigger wave of such bonds could be expected as the World Bank plans to sell as much as 2 billion SDR of such bonds in China. The SDR is a reserve currency administered by the International Monetary Fund, the price of which is determined by the basket of currencies, including the US dollar, euro, and Chinese yen. The yuan is scheduled to be included in the basket in October, which will be a milestone in the internationalization of the currency. So I'm going to, near the end of that, I'm going to keep on going. I got to move along here. The so-called SDR is an IMF construct of real currencies. Remember, the real currencies are fraud. They're fake. So watch the propaganda here. But let's go. Right now, the euro, yen, dollar, and pound, without actually containing any of them. The so-called SDR is a construct of real currencies without actually containing any of them. It is just a claim to demand payment on these currencies. It was made news last year when the Chinese renminbi was also admitted, although it won't be formally part of the basket until October 1st. Initially, quote, initially, SDR-denominated bonds will be of particular interest of official investors, but gradually they will also attract investors from private sectors. Understand what they're talking about here now. Understand the importance of what goes on right there, that they will attract the investors from private sectors. This is how it touches you. It becomes the medium of exchange in private sectors. That's you. In such a way, an SDR bond market will be developed. Bond is debt, folks. Bond is bondage. The Director General of the Bank of China's International Department is telling us about how this works. Worth Ray, the chief global macro strategist of STA Wealth Management, agrees, quote, right now there is no organic demand, but over a 5-year horizon it could be developed globally, and maybe that creates another channel for capital to flow into China, if that's the only market there is for it. It's all on speculation. This only happens when you allow it and let it happen. The SDR bonds issued by the two official institutions are different from the official SDR issued by the IMF. In fact, they are derivative of it. Puff and smoke, folks. Here it is, a global order, and only one organization is controlling all of it. When the World Bank unit called the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development issues the bonds, it receives payment in yuan from the Chinese market, or at first from the issues of Underwriter, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. Underwriters, those are mutual insurance. Now you start to see why you have to have insurance wherever you go. See, that's another control, isn't it? It's another way to monetize stuff. You don't get benefit of that. The benefit you get is to be regulated. Official SDRs can be redeemed for dollars, euros, yens, pounds, and soon yuan through the IMF. You don't get it at your local bank. However, the new private SDR, or MSDR, as the IMF calls it, cannot. The new bonds represent a claim on the IBRD. Since the IBRD doesn't have any SDR assets, the repayment will also be in yuan, dollars, and euros, yen, or pounds. So what's the point of having a new basket? For the IBRD, there's no advantage because it's borrowing in strong currencies and getting paid in relatively weak ones. For the Chinese investor, there is advantage that they can hold a sizable non-yuan denominated asset in China and reduce their risks to the Chinese currency, which may fall further in value. What did I suggest to you a long time ago about the fact that China was getting a lot of dollars, or credit for dollars, or buying bonds for dollars, because of the plastic crap we bought from their production? That there was trillions and trillions available, that I said they're going to have to go spend that somewhere. And also they were going to have to normalize themselves to the global economy. Now you have to be very cognizant of the fact that they have trillions that is an offset SDRs, which can be put into the global market, and they can liquidize their handling without destroying the United States market. This is pretty cool what they figured out how to undermine us. If they weren't undermining us, this would be pretty cool for all of us. Again, we are so creative we can create infinite wealth. And you're watching it happen, but it's not to our advantage. Now this advantage in China is only for the time being. At the point of maturity, the foreign currency will have to flow from the IBRD to the Chinese bondholders, unless they choose repayment in yuan, in which case the whole exercise would be rather pointless. So given the lackluster value proposition, why are China, the IMF, and U.S.-controlled World Bank going out of their way to push the SDR into private markets? Prominent market observers like James Rickards and Wilhelm Middlecoop have long argued that the SDR will be the next world reserve currency. Not an argument, folks. This is on the books. In fact, the current governor of the PBOC, Zhou Zingshaoen, has now advocated the SDR to become the next global currency for a long time. Now listen here, folks, because this is what they're telling you about what I was telling you about the superiority of this thing. They even talk about it here. Special consideration should be given, he says, to giving the SDR a greater role. The SDR has the feature and potential to act as a super sovereign reserve currency. Zhao wrote this in 2009 if you thought that the Chinese were out of the game all this time. They're late to fruition with their currency, but they've been underneath the system creating the new world currency system that they were going to be a part of. He also wanted the yuan to be included in the SDR, which is going to happen October 1st. So this guy is no slouch. What he wants happens. The Chinese have made it very clear that special drawing rights of the IMF is preferred future international reserve currency, Middlecoop has written. So this is their focus, folks. This is not a small thing to be looking the other way about. This future currency system, which China's been putting a lot of time in, is going to be by how they figure it works for them as well. What you're going to see is a world money. What you are going to see the IMF print special drawing rights. You're going to see the IMF print the special drawing rights. It's a geeky name, but it's a kind of world money printed by the IMF. They'll flood the world with trillions of SDRs. Now, I should maybe stop there. If you flood a system with something, and this happens to be viewed as money, doesn't it subsume all other monies and make yours useless or controllable? Can't the people that work in this new system who have created the belief that it works and you're sitting outside the loop of that, in trillions and what, like we were talking quadrillions, can't they buy everything up? See, when they went to this debt that can't be questioned, the writing was on the wall that these so-called bankers would own the earth. And understand, this is all driven by the UN stuff as well, but this is the financial side. It says you create new liquidity. That's the kind of reform that could change the international system immediately. Talk about putting the gas and the rubber to the road here, folks. This is going to change really, really fast. We won't feel it because we have an internal currency we're working with. But that will certainly be brought into servitude really quickly because of this overpressing control. This is in the works now, so you can't, they're here, it's here, folks, it's here. What I was telling you was coming and the plan is here. They're going to control the world through this world currency, and if you're not part of that, you won't get. So it is incumbent upon you to know we're at the precipice, that if you don't find an alternative to this, that you can trust amongst yourselves, that's in commodity, that they can't buy you out of the principle of needing your own monetary system. Not financial currency system, but your own money system, specie. That you will not give that up. You will not sell that off for the bowl of pottage, as we're told happens. Our inheritance, our abilities, we don't reduce ourselves to the monster, as the Valentines will define human. Then we have a chance. Otherwise, we really don't. And I take a little bit of encouragement because we're told that in that day, nobody without the number or the name, the number of his name will be able to buy or sell. Well, I looked at that. If I've got the guy's number, if I got your number, folks, does it mean in the slang, it means I understand you, doesn't it? If I got your number, that gave me a little bit of hope that says, well, if I got the number of the system that's coming down upon us, if I understand that system, I got its number, I can stand aside its influence and still actively participate where I need to be. The problem is that will be short-lived if I'm the only one, and that's talking to all y'all. The more you scuffle your feet and make excuses, your choices are going to be limited, and the ones that are left aren't going to have much a chance. And you're helping to predict that future by saying, well, what are you going to do? No, it's what am I going to do, folks? Each one of us. The Chinese are looking at this. It's really fascinating. When this thing goes into play, they get to transfer these bonds into and trade them for U.S. dollars without intervention by the system. They get to trade those dollars, their bonds for dollars. They've now monetized by Federal Reserve note all their money, and they didn't have to go through the Treasury to do it. So when I see I told you, I didn't understand how we were floating this economy since 2009. This is how they've been doing it. This is how the derivatives work. They just make it up. And we can continue to follow along this thing. This is big news. I don't even know what to say. This is such big news, I don't even know how big it is. That none of us are actually understanding this. We don't sense this. This is completely outside of our ability to understand, and we don't deal in it. It's not us. And yet it has the ability to come in and influence people and buy them out. Period. You don't think the 7 deadly sins are deadly? You wait till this kind of funds hits the market, and you wait to see how fast the international system starts to change. And the only way I can see you're going to survive it is to understand it, and to understand how to be different than that, and to never ever give up the principles that you need to be you and survive amongst you. And I mean you as we, the people themselves, not being driven by that legal system that is really the system of plunder implemented by the United Nations through whatever program they've got. So speaking of the United Nations and giving to underneath all that's being driven, don't forget that the Vatican sits there as a cohort. As silent as it is, it's kind of interesting. They placed it. It's very interesting how you watch how they set things up. They set the Holy See aside as not a participating member, but an observer. But that's a main power, and we saw that happen. Remember 2015? In fact, I was going to post this 2015 September. The 20th or so, I did a broadcast, exposed all this on the news. I said, here it comes. This is what we're doing. Well, right on cue, and all this renminbi, China bond, SDR thing, the Pope pops up to remind us. What I found interesting is in these words and looking at the transparent, what the heck this guy might be saying so we understand the point. Pope says gender theory part of global war on marriage. Pope says gender theory part of global war on marriage. We're dealing in global things in global times. He comes out and talks about the global war on marriage. You look at that and say, well, this is the Pope. He's all for purity and family and all this and that, and you think that he's speaking for family. I have to remind you, he's not. Remember back happened what I talked about in September last year. He doesn't say what side he supports. His actions, his deeds tell us he's anti-marriage, as is conventionally thought. He's anti-family. He's anti-family nucleus. He's anti-normalized civilization. How we understand, and we now reduce it to the trite word. This is another system term, tribe. Oh, it's on the tip of everybody's tongue, and it's a corruption. You don't have a family unit because of these types of people. You won't have much of a coherent society that you can come from. And you will be more susceptible to what we see they're doing, and more in particular because the root of all this this problem that we have is not having a sound money system. because that seems to lead us in our times of these days. You can deny the reality of it, but it's still going to be there. I found this interesting. This Pope pops up, talks about the global war on marriage, and yet when you read the story, you can go and I always encourage you to get the Blogcaster and read the reports. You'll see a whole lot. He doesn't tell you what side he is. In fact, he says Francis made his comment in an impromptu response to at a questioning of meeting of the small Catholic community in the ex-Soviet Republic of Georgia. And that's another type of slap going on there. But, quote, you mentioned, is the question, a great enemy of marriage, gender theory. The Pope said in his response to a woman who had asked about being taught in schools. He did not elaborate. You mentioned a great enemy of marriage, gender theory. And the Pope doesn't elaborate. Because he supports that theory. And if you doubt me, go back to September and we'll go through it. We'll go through it again. I don't need to even speak about it. I was already on. I'm memorialized for as long as there's a podcast available on that broadcast. This guy is one of the problems. They speak in neutral ways, and you put in what you believe is the proper context, and it's not, because they have us all messed up. He mentions about the enemy of marriage and gender theory. He doesn't mention whether or not he's sitting there as a warrior against the destruction of your family. Oh, but you remember back in September after he showed up, they had the big Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania thing about families. The big synagogue thing, whatever they did at the same time. Oh, I'm thinking about families. No, it's about to destroy them. And it's to bring on this vulnerability that you won't have enough people around you that even, now it seems that families they're just feuding amongst each other all over the place. There's not going to even be families to feud here in the near future. Talk about getting on at each other's throat. But this is all, to me, tied together. I don't know if anybody else sees it. I don't know if anybody understands it. If you don't, you're going to be subsumed by it. You won't even know where to start your resistance to it. And it's going to be mostly a passive resistance by having alternatives. You just don't engage, and then when they try to engage you, you have a better answer about how they're being a criminal when they do so, and you stop the man or woman in your face that comes under the color of authority, which is a felony, to counter what you have right to do, which is not underneath their control. So these are all stewards of the future, which we're talking about. And so I want to get back, and I think I can do it in this time. Quite a bit to study here in the next hour. Go back over to all these things are used against us, just like I was talking about NAPL, the DAPL, excuse me, the Dakota Access Pipeline. I think it's a fiasco, just a complete fiasco. Everyone's pointing their fingers at each other, and they're all being used, just like I said. Don't understand that this being the native side is being driven by Earth Justice attorneys. It's fascinating to watch the blindness that people are claiming to have sight and spirit don't see it. I'm just don't even know what to think about this stuff. I'm so disappointed in us as people. Peoples, would that make it more appropriate? Underneath all of this, we talk about steward. They want to talk about stewardship, stewarding the land, steward this, steward that. I told you I had a document that I came onto a little while now, a couple months now. I came across it. I found it by doing a word search on just some words that popped in my mind when I was doing other research that came up when I was doing other research. Put those words in, and this document came up. Had to do with stewarding and reflexive. I know that. I don't remember now what I was even studying now, too, that came up. There's some words that called my attention. I said, I wonder if the source of this is actually this reflexive law imposition, and that there is a connection between that and environment. And so, this document pops up. And the only time the word steward pops up is once. And I took real interesting note of that. That's the Trojan horse. They don't want to make it too obvious, at least the way I interpret these things anymore. So let me go over, as I was talking to you last week, about the stalking horses and the stewardship and the stakeholders now in the context of legal entities Remember, everyone wants to hold it's contrary to the the corporations are destroying us, when what you're dealing with is only corporations if you haven't figured it out. Even the ones that complain about having the corporations being fighting, they have corporate representatives representing them. The disconnect in this is so great, I don't even know where to begin. And so I want to point out this word, the only place in this document talking about stakeholders and stockholders, in the context of where this term stakeholder was created, the stakeholder identity status is to cause a imposition that comes under this term called stewarding and stewardship. And to steward what? But the natural resources. That this document is what I consider one of the guru documents to tell those people what they need to do in order to take you out. And this has caused me to look, I use these terms in research because I'm seeing them all the time and we have to deal with them. This is not an idle discussion. This is the tools they use, and I like to understand the enemy and how they got where they got and how it makes it easier for us to defeat them. And utilizing this document alone in the last month or so now, we've been able to do even more work to destroy the problem. It becomes a distinction between what our environmental sense of our environment is versus that environmental sense being used as a pretext to use what we would think is our better nature to actually use against us. Under this nice, warm, and fuzzy word called stewarding. What better thing to do, folks, but to steward? This is at the end of the document, because I think I need to start here about this steward thing, because this is the end result. This is near the end of the document, not at the end, but near it. It talks about steward, and it talks of focus on natural resources, and then you have to go back up in the top, and we'll talk about who's actually running this, who's using this weapon. As you'll find out, I'm kind of predisposing you to a thought, but I think I can prove it out pretty quickly. Comes on a question: could it be considered mandatory for firms to contribute resources to environmental efforts? This question explores the difference between permissibility and obligation. You're going to put your thinking hats on in this document. This is a guru-level instruction manual, folks, using special terminology that I'm not going to be able to really do any justice to either, but I can give you the insight of what's going on here, of what we're dealing with and what we're everywhere. The Indians in North Dakota, the ranchers, the farmers, the miners, the people in the cities, the so-called urbanites, the urban-rural divide that was created to divide you all out, to create the academic centers in Urbania that would give servitude of the rural to the urban. This whole facade creation that also fabricates impositions upon you in mind that has actually been started quite a while ago, that you were born and brought into, that you don't even recognize. Splitting the hairs down to where you really have to start paying attention, and unless you do, you don't see the magic go on, the bunko game, the pea in a cup. I want you to pick the pea where the pea in the cup is, and you don't realize that after a while of moving it around, the pea was taken off the board. It doesn't matter what you pick. It was set up. The big deal was getting you to buy in. Could it be considered mandatory for firms to contribute resources in environmental efforts? This question explores the difference between permissibility and obligation. It asks that whether firms are obligated to support or enhance the environment, and whether firms need to support other stakeholders. Firms are other stakeholders who are concerned about the environment. Again, firms are morally and legally responsible to stakeholders based at least in part on reliance considerations. Because society relies upon the natural environment, and because some natural resources are finite, it is incumbent upon society to carefully steward natural resources. It's incumbent upon society to carefully steward natural resources. Since firms as an aggregate, see, all these words are loaded big time. I don't even know where to stop to interject and interrupt my statement to read this out. Aggregates are another corporation. They're talking about inventing another entity to come and attack things. The firms as an aggregate, business as another entity, as an aggregated entity, use substantial amount of natural resources, and because they often have power, control, and finances to protect natural resources when compared to isolated individuals, they are obligated to use their wherewithal to protect natural resources for the benefit of societies in which the firm are embedded. Now, why are the firms embedded here, folks? Where is that concept? Did you qualify the fact that, is it truly an obligation on a business, actually? Or is this a fabrication of a hypothesis that's not really proven out? Well, you would have to find out by reading the rest of the document. I'm going to give you cut to the chase and tell you this is a fabricated obligation to impose the environment as a weapon that you can use against somebody else. And they have to pretend, accept that because you can use this as a weapon against them, they have an interest in what you do. Says that these firms that feel like this are also going to be accepting the imposition by criminals to take away their stuff over a fabricated obligation. And I say fabricated obligation because this is all answered in property law. Anybody trespassing anybody else has a remedy at law. It's answered right there if you understand the comprehensiveness of what I just said. That we don't need to go to this hyper extension of a definition to bring in the legitimacy of an environmental imposition. Even in mining law, the hydraulic mining is most notorious to most people. Miners used to hydraulic mine because that was the most efficient, cheap way to get mineral or the gold. Went down the rivers, it'd plug up the river systems, it would flood on over into ranchers, it would affect their property rights. At some point, someone said, "Whoa, you don't have that right." The courts determined that was true. As a property right, the property owner of the miner had no right to interfere with the agricultural operations downstream. And so it was ruled that hydraulic mining was not illegal, but they could not let their waste run down the river. They had to contain it. It was settled. Environmental law was settled on property rights then. And this is a big disconnect I see today. The answers are already in our law when you understand how it works. So, stewarding goes to society is contrary to land disposal in the United States of America. Stewarding by society was by Congress given over to the private possessor in disposal of the lands to private people. To say society stewards those natural resources is to create a societal fascism as it works out going through non-governmental organizations or these entities. I'm pausing because I want you to think about how this works. They're imposing a non-lawful construct over this term stewarding, and the concept of society controls what natural resources are being done. But folks, what actually controls that? Isn't that you and me making demand on that system? And when they say a finite resource, isn't there really only one? And that's minerals? Because it's actually able to be, everything else is a resource. A finite thing is not a resource, it's a source. And so they give a convolution of term here that if you don't understand that basic thought, you think that they can extend everywhere and society has an obligation to do it through their firms, which I can't find any authority for, which is controlled by property law. We don't need these folks. last point at the very end of the document, I want to tie up, again, this control through environmental imposition. And the corporate, when you use the word sustainability, you are a corporate construct. So anybody who's talking about anti-corporations, who's also talking about carbon tax, clean water in the concept of pristine, talking about global warming, talking about financial constructs that are coming outside from the fiat system, you're agreeing that you are coming through a corporate authority. This document proves it. It all comes underneath the name, for most of us, that we hear environmental. It is important to keep in mind, this is this document speaking, it is important to keep in mind, while corporations are fictions, the individuals who populate them are very real. While the corporations might not care about environment, as humans do, its stakeholders are dependent upon a habitual environment for their survival. So sustainability, then, is not just the way of the future, it is what will provide a future. Stakeholders are dependent, folks. Stakeholders are legal firms. Sustainability is the imposition of an environmental excuse of an obligation on business. That's a theory that has never been proven out more than by conjecture in this document. That the document here poses a human imposition, identifying people inside the corporations which can be influenced because the legal entity is it's an undead. Identifying for us that there's people inside that are actually making these impositions upon everybody being a stakeholder. The stakeholder becomes a criminal. As I talk about this part, and talking to the people inside the corporations, or the presence and promotion of sustainability, as we'll see, is a crime. As I've talked to you all along, this is just confirming the fact. You talk about influencing the management of these firms in order to come to environmentally sustainable, which means enforcement of UN foreign agenda. You influence the management inside those corporations in order to cause the change that you're looking toward, the subversion of your way of life. In fact, it's the corporations that are doing this. So those of you standing outside of wherever you stand, railing against the corporations, talking about sustainability, they got you. They got you, and they're just waiting for you to be subsumed like the rest of us. They use your imposition, your power and your imposition and your righteousness, your spiritual indignation against you, and you don't even know it. Sustainability is completely corporate legal entity bound, and it looks to influence the people inside those organizations. During the past decade, many of the companies, this was written in a William and Mary environmental law policy document, stakeholder versus stockholder, where they identify the stakeholder as someone who can influence a company that has a bearing on that company only because it can affect the bottom line. I've just defined extortion to you, folks. That's what sustainability does. That's what stakeholders do. That's what this whole thing is meant to accomplish. During the past decade, many of the companies that have distinguished themselves are those that recognize the inherent value people bring to their organization by not checking their personal values at the door, but by allowing their personal values to influence business decisions making in new and creative ways. Not checking their personal values? Not having principles? And this is the basis that we start talking about this document. We're now sitting at page 12 or 13 on this thing. This is the basis that you're coming to talk about, is where people check their personal values at the door. You don't have a thought here, folks. Sustainability is not your thought. It is what's going to be given to you. Stakeholders are those, by definition, that already agree to the outcome, or they're not stakeholders. And I challenge anybody to look and see whether or not a property owner was ever a stakeholder in one of these consensus-based dispute resolution systems for comment. This only makes sense. This is the logic of this criminal. This only makes sense. Organizations hire people because their particularized skill sets and personalities. This only makes sense. Organizations hire people because of their particularized skill sets and personalities. For individuals to attempt to make decisions without reference to such factors is to deprive organizations of the qualities for which those specific individuals were hired. Although the law might be blind, we want our business organizations and their managers to be anything but blind. We read that, catch the possessive. Although the law might be blind, we want our business organizations and their managers to be anything but blind. Instead of legislating the bottom line, it seems to make sense, morally, legally, and in terms of good and successful business thinking, to rely on firms to choose for themselves how they will respond to hurdles associated with the natural environment and the finiteness of natural resources. Reference 61. Let's go down to that. But C. Eric W. Ort's reflexive environmental law. Hereinafter, a reflexive model. A theory of reflexive law proposes an alternative approach to law reform. It focuses on enhancing self-referential capacities of social systems and institutions outside the legal system, rather than direct intervention of the legal system itself through agencies' highly detailed statutes or delegations of great power to courts. Instead of avoiding legislation, Professor Orts argues in favor of a reflexive model which enlists, quote, intermediate social institutions in the effort of regulation. Intermediate social institutions is what I termed GangGreen a long time ago. It's these social terrorists, it's these NGOs. Contrasted with traditional command and control model, it is valuable in that it links the key stakeholders involved with potential solutions to the problem. Remember, we sued the Solutions Network in our lawsuit by way of the university system. We did that in 2013, not because I read this document. Quote, reflexive environmental law seeks to tie businesses, which are a major source of many environmental problems, more closely to environmental solutions. The word environmental here you think is the trees and the bunnies and the bees, and that would be you being naive. I just tell you that right now. We'll get to that. Environmental here means their system of control and how they're going to get it. The environment they create. It's all through corporate control and influencing the management in these places, which means you're dealing with mind-controlled people to press the agenda. This reference footnote goes on. The non-legislative approach is thus proposed in this paper as a viable and real alternative. Don't they always offer solutions as alternatives? The non-legislative approach, folks, is outside your legislative capacity. It's exactly what they tell us in the caution. Warning. What we propose here is not within normal constitutional, legislative, statutory, or codification principles. It's adjunct policy in a term. Adjunct policy. As an alternative to your rule, your law, that brings peace and settlement. These are going to be coming as an alternative to that. Now, why would you bring an alternative to peace and settlement unless you want war? The footnote goes on, continues and goes on. However aspirational it appears, it provides a starting point for business and an opportunity for them to take charge of their relationship with the natural environment instead of waiting for a suitable legislative answer. Why do I need a whole document right here for me to figure out I don't want to live in my own waste and I'll keep my place clean? That was not in the moral sense or legal or ethical sense of a company looking at profit, that the laws of property would also check and control. That I need a whole new alternative approach to our law processes. It is really a wonder to me to begin with. So that was the footnote explaining this reflexive connection to environmental law on their need to control firms to take a non-legislative approach to this in order to push this agenda that we show and see right there allows and requires stakeholders to be a gang to affect other stakeholders and other things that they can. The challenge, it goes on here, this guru paper says, it seems, lies in finding ways to create incentives to motivate managers to draw upon their own moral resources when addressing business concerns such as these. But these moral resources are not there, folks. They've been vanquished by inculcation to whatever people have been trained into. What incentives and motivations are nothing more than bribes, folks. Number 2 here, views on the firm. Determining how to create these sorts of incentives and motivational tools, those that allow and encourage managers to draw upon their own values and talents, depends upon how the firm is viewed. Expectations of corporations are inherently colored by mental models and preconceptions regarding the nature of the firm and its role in society. The prevalent view of the firm characterizes it as merely a vehicle for profit maximization. A more robust understanding of the firm, one that captures the full range of relationships in which the firm is embedded. The firm is embedded. Why is a firm embedded? What is this why is it dealt with as a tick? These firms are embedded, provides the foundation for the potential of non-legalistic response to business problems, including those involving the natural environment and sustainability. Well, here's, folks, that this is an improper imposition on a business. These people are already prejudicing their discussion to favor their argument. The non-legalistic response to business problems that are imposed on them are non-legalistic. So we have to necessarily transfer our jurisdiction over to who is making that up. And it's outside of our normal scheme of things, if I can say it that way, the normal ability for a business. That means you, folks, and wanting to make a business. They're talking about you. And influencing your mind and the control of your business to have natural environment and sustainability concerns. Sustainability is the UN. It's their view of control. A stockholder view of the firm. Now we're definitely in corporate status. Not just a firm here, we're actually a legal entity with a legal existence under the laws of the state, acting non-legally. The traditional traditional view of the firm prioritizes stockholders, as illustrated in this figure 1 that I can't give you, but you can get it when you get the Blogcaster. During the mid to late 1960s, business people increasingly began challenging the role of the manager, which, with regard to prescribed non-involvement in matters deemed social, quote social, such as pollution, inflation, and poverty. While these problems affect society as a whole, some people have argued that businesses are better positioned than individuals to tackle these types of concerns effectively and successfully. People have argued about this. In other words, this is not set in stone either, and there is no common conclusion, and I don't think there would be. Everyone's free to do their business, again, constrained by by no adverse effect for things around them, or at least manageably so. Nothing's perfect. That would be a determination for each manager, each business owner. These people are coming in as do-gooders to say that's not good enough. Advocates of the stockholder view of the firm have nevertheless maintained that it is not the place of the managers or firms to dabble in social responsibility. They contend that managers should, indeed they are obligated as a matter of fiduciary duty, focus on maximizing stockholder returns. That might be a contention for a lot of you all. Don't get wrapped up in all this corporation nonsense. This is the tool they use against you. So you better understand more than our prejudicial knee-jerk response about corporate view. They treat you as a legal entity. So don't forget that point, and you address and you jump into sustainable things, which happens to be all the things that you need to live. So be careful. Don't let your mind shut off here. Oh, we're talking about corporate things. They're talking about you. You're the manager of your life, the business they've created in the name that they use for you. Milton Friedman, a noted free market economist, that was a joke. A noted free market economist has been the chief spokesman for this view, which he articulated most prominently in an article that has for more than 30 years remained among the most often cited references for stockholder theory of the firm. The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. Initially appeared in the New York Times Magazine in 1970 and has subsequently been reprinted in a wide variety of sources. Interestingly, while it was published in the popular press as a news article, it addresses and is tenable to both scholars and practitioners and remains the leading encapsulation of stockholder theory of firm management. In sum, Friedman denounces any discussion of social responsibility for business, as their investors and stockholders are entitled to corporations' residual profits. The interests of all other constituents are preempted by pre-existing arrangements. Profits are to be provided to stockholders just as products and services are delivered to customers, paychecks are distributed to employees, and so on. Friedman concludes, there is one and only one social business responsibility of business, to use its resources to engage its activities designed to increase its profits so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. And those of you of my free market listeners, you say, well, what's wrong with all that? Well, he capitulates to this imposition later on, this other imposition. Somebody got to him. On the other hand, if you understand the lingo, maybe not. Except that he does capitulate the point without clarification. Maybe he's recognizing the inevitable. I don't know. Friedman's conclusion is echoed in the more recent opinion expressed by Albert Carr. Quote, as long as a company does not transgress the rules of the game set by law, it has the legal right to shape its strategy without reference to anything but profits. A wise businessman will not seek advantage to the point where he generates dangerous hostility among employees, competitors, customers, government, or the public at large. But decisions in this area are, in the final test, decisions of strategy, not ethics. And just as a private aside, it's essentially how when I was growing up, that's why you did business, and you did it to serve your customer base, and you pleased them, and your business would prosper, and you had to find something that people wanted. It was pretty simple that way. There was no other consideration, and in that was almost a self-checking provision, given that everybody knew what the business is that you did. And we're just talking on the up and up here. Going back to the article, this statement captures the underlying belief that has traditionally characterized thinking about business, that business decisions are driven by profits and only profits, and that ethics are virtually irrelevant with the exception of deception, fraud, and so on. And I have to say that's maybe a misstatement. If you are looking to the customer base, more than likely you're having to have some moral, ethical response to them. And so it's kind of built into the model that's disregarded in this article to build the point that there needs to be a new model, non-legislative, non-law. I understand the law. This firm in this old decision says that these firms operate under law. The new one is there is none. B, you have this argument, evolution of legal thinking. Now we get the bar member in here, remember? Don't divorce the players. Jurisprudence, such that it can be called in the United States, has evolved at least a century of debate about the nature of business and the significance of stockholders and other stakeholders. Now here they use the word stakeholder for the first time. But it's in a different regard. It's almost more like a stakeholder to a miner. If you make an investment in a miner to go do a prospect, you have a stake in his activity. That was an investment. That's a risk-based investment. Now it's deemed to be someone who promotes sustainability as a stakeholder, one who can affect, and it's mostly adversely affect, someone else. So this century of debate over this stockholder-stakeholder is not the same debate that we would have today over a stockholder and stakeholder. That this document goes through to explain how it was altered, and I can identify for myself at least how it was done criminally. And not hardly anybody knows that, but we got the clues. It's done non-legislatively to influence people outside and beyond their personal, where they drop their personal morals and ethics at the door. That can be influenced by someone external to them, or will recognize that because that externality exists, they better comport their actions. And haven't I just talked about the green terrorist organizations that we deal with? You don't do what they say, they're going to sue you. Isn't that right? Since then, this article goes on, has evolved a conflation of the requirements that the business have profit-generated motive, with the perceived requirement that business, more properly business management, should focus on profit maximization. Number one, the Dodge versus Ford Motor Company case. The stockholder view of the corporation asserts that corporations are purely private enterprises with a single goal of wealth maximization for the owners of the shares. The idea here is that the corporate funds are limited, and if they are poured into philanthropic or other outside activities under the guise of doing something socially responsible, funds are not they're being directed toward their proper end, which are stakeholder ownership. This is the view seemingly accepted by the court in the Dodge decision, where the court held that the corporation's primary purpose is to maximize profit maximization for stockholders. The court indicated that a corporation and its managers owe a fiduciary duty to its stockholders, and that the corporation's primary purpose is profit maximization for stockholders. In this case, the court effectively nullified Henry Ford's discretionary powers to use the corporate profits for the benefit of employees and consumers, for that interfered with profits being returned to stockholders. The Dodd versus Burrell debate. In 1932, an ongoing debate between Merrick Dodd and Alfred A. Burrell, Jr., conducted in a series of articles published in the Harvard Law Review, brought the controversy between stockholders and stakeholders to a greater public awareness. Again, I have to interject. These stakeholders are ones with an interest in the risk outcome. The stakeholder of today is someone who is a terrorist, who can affect that firm. One's an internal thing, and the other is the external thing. So keep track of this one, because if you miss that, you miss everything here. Going on, in his article, Dodd argued that the managers act with the trust of the entire community, and the corporations provide a social service as well as profit-making function for society. Managers, therefore, have fiduciary obligations which, instead of being limited to stockholders, should extend to a broader range of constituents. Constituents, isn't that a political process, these constituents as well? Voting share. Don't they make now the community a voting stockholder in a way through this constituency they now impose? And you see how they use these words in order to validate a position which actually shouldn't be commingled. The constituents are now commonly referred to as the firm's stakeholders. There's the conversion. The constituents are now commonly referred to as the firm's stakeholders. Burrell, in reply, argued that this sort of view of managers and corporations potentially opens the floodgates to widespread abuse. Boy, wasn't he telling the truth right there, as we experience today. He contended that absent the legal obligations of managers to protect the financial interests of their stockholders, there is a serious danger of managerial indiscretion. Burrell therefore cautioned against the notion of corporate social responsibility because it does not fall within the appropriate scope of corporate undertaking. As Burrell notes, quote, unchecked by present legal balances, a social economic absolutism of corporate administrators, even if benevolent, might be unsafe and in any case it hardly affords the soundest base on which to construct the economic commonwealth which industrialism seems to require. Meanwhile, we had best be protecting the interests we know, being no less swift to provide for the new interests as they successfully appear. I want to bring your mind back to the beginning of this. Socioeconomic absolutism is sustainable development. It is what the UN promotes. In the end, Burrell's view prevailed, and the courts and legislatures in the United States since then have tended to subscribe to the position that the maximization of stockholder wealth benefits stakeholders more than the alternative course of action. This is the old definition of stakeholder. This is not to say that the Burrell entirely won. Although his position seemed to prevail initially, scholars and practitioners, academia, and practitioners, the legal system, have continued to question the relationship between managers and constituents, the stakeholders. The constituents are the stakeholders. Who are these entities? Who are these things? Who are the constituents to a system? They've now made an attachment. If you look at it as the voting system, they've made an attachment. The constituents are the governed. Governed by what? It's not spoken to in this document. They just make the connection. Right here is the crime I'll identify for you if you haven't heard it. But this is where the academia and the legal profession starts to make the confusion. To alter this thing ever so much to be able to bring on what we see today. Indeed, Burrell himself subsequently conceded the point to Dodd more than 20 years later and noted, modern directors are not limited to running business enterprises for maximum profit, but are in fact and recognized in law as administrators of a community system. Now, this is where Burrell was enforcing the first free marketer, and then he flips over to include this now as the prevailing pressure that controls how the corporations are going to be dealing with the community at large. They're now subsumed into a community system. And I would have to say that's the destruction of that free market. Well, we already see that, the imposition by an externality which can threaten your government, your corporate government, your corporate stockholders. These are people that come together for a risk-based investment to try and do things that are now being attached to a community system. Since the Dodd and Burrell debate, businesses and law in the United States have moved beyond Dodd's decision both in theory and practice. How do you move beyond a law determination, folks? But the non-legislative path that they produced would be the way you do this. Document goes on, says, corporations clearly serve societal roles beyond pure stockholder wealth maximization with the tempered support of both legislators and jurists. With the tempered support of both legislators and jurists, folks, is collusion. But there it is. The state and the federal legislation identifies and affords protections for competing concerns, and judges often sanction unconventional corporate activities as long as they cannot be construed as causing direct interference with the shareholder profits by deferring to managerial discretion. Now we're back to the people that are in the seats of decision of the corporation that can be influenced or inculcated into an agenda, which are being pressed to do the moral and ethical thing, which has really just been a fabrication of what's moral and ethical. It has no actual moral and ethical base. And it's based on theories that aren't even proven. Just like everything else that you see, like climate change and all this other nonsense. Now, article goes on, although the Dodge decision was never officially overturned, it has in practice been set aside. How do you do that in a country ruled by law to keep the peace, folks? How is that set aside unless the people in the seats of decision and the practitioners and the academics just ignored law? And we sat back and didn't know this was going on, but we sit back after hearing this, and how do you look at that? They set aside law, an understanding on how things work, just set it aside. How do you do that? And if you are going to go ahead and use this as an authority where they set Dodge aside, where it was done, why can't you just set aside anything else that irritates you? Would be an interesting question for somebody in authority. But they just set aside the standard, folks. This is the reality you're living in now. Everyone looks for a court precedent. There isn't going to be one. Article goes on, it is no longer followed or accepted as binding precedent. It is merely a landmark in legal theory. Did you know all your system is so weak that it just can be ignored? And if it can be ignored by this sentence, this paragraph alone, why can't you use this as a defense in a court of law, so-called, because it's all this reflexive stuff, folks. But why can't you use that? How about we just set aside? You know, set aside is a pre-plea remedy and avoidance. Did you know that? How about we just set that aside, judge? You allowed it in Dodge decision. There's no set in stone. Let's just set that aside. Let's make that a mere legal theory in the past as a landmark. We passed. But this is how they build this discussion about stakeholders. So here's another violation. They just set aside the law. They don't care. And if you're crickets, you don't care. They don't care. You don't care. They don't care. They don't care. You don't care. It's fine. Whatever is appropriate is the rule. Whatever appropriate, you heard that in the Bar Association documents I read to you, wherever appropriate means whatever they get away with. Number 3, as we move on, constituency statutes. During the 1980s, many states gradually adopted, brought in foreign impositions and agreed that they'd be okay inside the gate. Quote, constituency statutes. These statutes, drafted in virtually identical language, these are model acts, folks, across which the Bar Association made, expressly permit managers to consider the interests of certain constituents, stakeholders, under certain circumstances. Although these statutes have rarely, if ever, been applied, their emergence reflexive law, I don't even think it can't be considered law, reflects a significant and meaningful shift in legal thinking in that they acknowledge the interest of non-stockholder constituents. This was done by the Bar Association seeding the system. The role of fiduciary duty, number 4. Another important consideration in the notion of fiduciary duty is the notion of fiduciary duty, which is often assumed to preempt attention to stakeholders. As Richard Marins and Andrew Wicks points out, quote, courts did not historically encumber corporate management with a fiduciary duty toward company stockholders in order to privilege shareholders vis-a-vis other stakeholder groups. I want to go back up, assume the preemption attention to stakeholders, and they also talk about the fact then that they're going to be changing that. Your decisions based on some external threat is what this ends up coming to. Rather, it was designed to prevent self-dealing on the part of directors and top management that fell short of criminal behavior such as embezzlement. So we're dealing with some real serious problems within the corporate structuring that needs to be dealt with, that they then now start to give those problems. When you have a problem, the occupier will look to see how that division, they can exploit it to become more effective in interfering with your life in the future. While the notion of a fiduciary duty does serve to prevent self-serving managerial behavior, it was not intended to preclude managerial considerations of non-stockholder concerns. Non-stockholder stakeholder concerns. According to Marins and Wicks, again, according to two people, Untested, just academics, just making this stuff up as they go, thinking that they're the do-gooders that can change the thoughts of companies and businesses. And I'm not going to say they did. Ultimately, they're doing it. But the point is the source is coming from just two minds somewhere out there. They say when conflict of interest is not at issue, no case law or corporate statute argues that the management fiduciary should be equated with a right of stockholders to oversee managerial decision-making. They further assert, just an assertion, you only have the rights you assert, so they're asserting this, whether or not it's right or not, I don't know, we're just going to talk about it. Meeting fiduciary duties to shareholders does not entail that managers must side with shareholders and against stakeholders. Now the stakeholder has a foot in the door, right? Don't invite Dracula, folks. They've given the power to a manager to not look at the shareholders as against stakeholders. Your stakeholders now are sitting in the boardroom. And you got to look at this as you having a decision with your own self about your own goings-on, about what you want to do in the world and what you want to do on your own. Understand now these stakeholders are now sitting in your kitchen making those impositions. If you don't understand that we're actually talking about you, I keep telling you, you got to understand that they're talking about this in the corporate firm consequence, but you don't understand you're considered a legal entity from that consequence. They further assert meeting fiduciary duties to shareholders does not entail that managers must side with shareholders and against stakeholders. Firms that have the legal autonomy to act proactively and advance the interest of a number of stakeholders simultaneously. Therefore, stakeholders are not afforded Therefore, stockholders, the people who have the risk in the company, are not afforded inherent legal priority in this theory. You now see the community system imposed upon business. These are just thoughts from people, folks, that are controlling this thing and moving this thing in a direction where the UN, where the Bar Association, where the global structure needs it to go. That they give power. In other words, if this is reduced to property, they're giving somebody down the road the right to tell you what to do with your land. What other property in a business is it when it's yours, exclusively possessed in your blood, sweat, and tears that you have watched been eroded by this concept? Therefore, stockholders, you that have the actual stock in this endeavor, in this organization, are not afforded inherent legal priority. No, the community gets to have a say now. The stakeholder. Folks, that is a felony. Right there. C, stakeholder view of the firm. Now, from the perspective of the stakeholder, in contrast with the stockholder view, the stakeholder view of the firm recognizes that stockholders are but one group of relevant constituents. We're all equal here, folks. You hear that? However have you heard that before? All equality. Relevant constituents. We're all voters in this game. I'm a voter in your business. How's that? This is how this works. This is their theory on how this comes down. This is how it works. And we have been crickets against it. According to this view, a stakeholder now, according to this view, remember it changes, and here it is again. A stakeholder is an individual or group who affect or is or are affected by the operations of the firm. According to this view, a stakeholder is any individual or group who affect or are affected by the operations of the firm. Do I have to read that again? A stakeholder is anyone, I have to read it again, you have to get this. By this theory, which has not been proven out except that it does work to hurt you, a stakeholder is any individual or group who affect or are affected by the operations of the firm. The stockholders are stakeholders, but so, too, are employees, customers, and a wide range of others. Although this sort of thinking dates back at least a century, the term stakeholder has only been used in this way since 1984, when Edward Freeman authored Strategic Management, a Stakeholder Approach. In his book, Freeman did what no one else had yet successfully attempted. He confronted the vague stakeholder notion head-on and developed a pragmatic, comprehensive analysis of business and its stakeholders according to business functions, products, markets, activities, and duties. In other words, they made a lie that the stakeholder notion was vague. In fact, it was understood very clearly. He made it vague, and you see how the comprehensive nature, the umbrella, the wet blanket he now is going to control by his control of this term, his redefinition. Whereas past scholars and practitioners had referred to stakeholders in passing or had merely assumed a shared understanding of the term, Freeman consciously introduced and articulated the basis for a theory that competes head-on with commonly accepted stockholder theory of the firm. The choice of the word stakeholder was intentional. He asserted, words make the difference in how we see the world. By using stakeholder, managers and theorists alike will come to see these groups having a stake. Stakeholder connotes legitimacy, and while managers may not think that certain groups are legitimate in the sense that their demands on the firm are inappropriate, they had better give legitimacy to these groups in terms of their ability to affect the firm. Is the definition of felony coercion and felony theft by extortion, folks. His view is a crime. His view, because it can affect you, that it's given legitimacy, is a crime by definition. This is like because Genghis Khan and the horde standing behind him can affect you when you say, no, I don't want you coming in my house. That Genghis Khan and his horde becomes a stakeholder in your decision. And this is where I try to look, and I'll move over to the fact of called GangGreen. This is what you're looking at, the stakeholders in environmental context and reflexive law. This is Genghis Green. This is the mere fact that they can plunge, they can beat you down just because they exist. This is Genghis Green on our doorsteps, in our houses, around, at our kitchen table, everywhere now, by this definitional shift. Just because I can threaten you, I'm a stakeholder in your affairs, is the definition of stakeholder that everyone seems to want to use everywhere. And I didn't finish this. I'm going to get back to this. I hope to finish this next week. I'm going to read some more. I got another few pages to read through that expose this crime against us. So thank you very much today for tuning in. I'm running out of time. I appreciate, Grimner, what you do there. Keep the website set up, giving me the place for the broadcaster and the chat rooms and all the chatters and everything, and freedomsnetwork.com and social network. Join up if you want, please. Enjoy that space. Like Facebook, but not. And UCY.tv. Thank you, Jules, for simulcasting, and then all the places, Spreaker, Montgomery Mary, allowing for that, and the terrestrial broadcasters. Thank you very much for what you do, and I'll be with you next week. Tech diffs and nature willing. Take care.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass. JJ Inc., and when I'm on planet Earth, I listen